Her voice cut through the auditorium like shattered glass, shrill and relentless, bouncing off the walls with a force that made even the microphones crackle. Candace Owens stood at the center of the stage, her hand clenched tightly around the mic, her voice raised to the point where veins traced across her neck, the words themselves blurred in the fury of their delivery, an avalanche of accusations, dismissals, and scorn. But the sound, that piercing sound, carried more than sentences. It carried a kind of desperation. The crowd shifted uneasily in their seats. Some whispered, some smirked, and others simply raised their phones, screens glowing like fireflies in the dark, desperate to capture this unfolding storm. The camera lenses zoomed in on her contorted face, every flicker of rage preserved for replay. Her supporters clapped at intervals, uncertain if the applause was to cheer her words or to drown out the discomfort swelling in the room. It was a moment meant to dominate, to overwhelm, to bend the audience beneath the sheer weight of noise. Candace screamed, not for dialogue, but for spectacle, not for persuasion, but for control. And for a heartbeat, it seemed as if her volume had won. But then, freeze. The scene hangs suspended, the echo of her voice, sharp and metallic, fades into the rafters above the stage. The audience, caught in that split second, sits frozen. Brows furrow, arms cross, whispers ripple like a tide. The tension thickens, every eye flicking not to Candace, but to the woman standing quietly on the opposite side of the stage. Jasmine Crockett, unmoved, unshaken, her posture straight, her expression calm, her silence speaking louder than the storm that had just tried to drown her. In that stillness was something unexpected, something stronger than rage. The audience could feel it, even before she spoke. Candace's scream might have owned the volume, but Jasmine was about to own the moment, and that is what left the crowd in disbelief. Because what would echo long after this night was not the fury of a scream, but the power of a reply born in composure. And just when the air seemed ready to snap from the tension, Jasmine drew a breath, because what followed would change everything. The stage itself was charged before the first word was spoken. A crowded auditorium, spotlights burning hot against polished wood, cameras lined up like silent judges ready to beam every second across the internet. This wasn't just another panel discussion, another televised debate to fill the endless churn of political commentary. No, this was theater, and the nation was watching. Two women stood as opposing forces. On one side, Candace Owens, a figure who had mastered the art of provocation. She thrived in chaos, her reputation built not on nuance, but on the velocity of her rhetoric. To her followers, she was fearless. To her critics, she was reckless. And to anyone listening closely that night, she was desperate for domination, wielding her voice like a weapon. On the other side stood Jasmine Crockett, not with fire or fury, but with the quiet conviction of someone who understood the weight of history on her shoulders. She represented not just herself, but generations who had been silenced, dismissed, told they were too emotional, too loud, too much. The irony of facing down a storm like Candace was almost poetic. Jasmine didn't need to scream. She carried with her the dignity of ancestors who had survived louder storms and far crueler stages. The political climate sharpened every word. The country was weary, fractured along lines of race, identity, and ideology. People were no longer just debating policies. They were debating their right to exist, their right to belong, their right to be heard without distortion. In that room, it wasn't simply about one woman screaming and another standing still. It was about what America would choose to validate, the spectacle of rage or the substance of composure. Candace understood the mechanics of attention. Outrage went viral, fury got clicks, every scream, Every insult, every jab was calibrated to trend, to trigger, to dominate headlines. She was a master of the theater of chaos, and she believed that volume could always drown out truth. For years, she had succeeded with this formula. Audiences had rewarded her heat more than her logic. The louder she grew, the more she seemed to matter. But Jasmine represented a shift, a generational change that refused to play by the same rules. Her calm wasn't weakness, it was defiance. Her silence wasn't passivity, it was strategy. Every second she stood composed was a direct contradiction to Candace's entire playbook. The audience could feel it in the air. This wasn't going to end the way Candace thought. The stakes weren't just personal, they were national. To immigrants watching, to young people of color scrolling through live streams, to every person who had been told to tone it down just to be taken seriously, Jasmine was more than a politician. She was a mirror of their own fight for dignity. And in Candace's scream, they heard every insult ever hurled at them. In Jasmine's stillness, they saw a different path to victory. So when Candace leaned further into her fury, her voice sharp with mockery, she believed she was tightening her grip on the night. But the truth was slipping quietly from her hands. She couldn't see it yet, but the audience could. She thought volume would win the day. She was wrong. Candace Owens did not stumble into controversy. She built her career on it. From the beginning, she understood the economy of outrage, how anger could be repackaged as influence, how provocation could masquerade as courage. She learned that if you were willing to say what others only whispered, if you were willing to be the loudest voice in a crowded room, people would look. And looking was all that mattered in a world where attention equaled power. Her rise was meteoric, not because she offered solutions, but because she offered spectacle. One viral moment after another, Candace carved out a place where her name was synonymous with confrontation. She reveled in being branded as fearless, though critics argued that fearlessness was easy when you were insulated by a platform built on rage. Each appearance, each clip, each soundbite followed a pattern. Attack, dismiss, dominate. She wielded mockery as a weapon and volume as a shield. For years, it worked. There was a formula to her method. Step 1. Pick a target, someone vulnerable, someone earnest, or someone who symbolized progress. Step 2. Strip away nuance, reduce them to a caricature, and hit them with derision sharp enough to draw blood. Step 3. Amplify. Get the clip trending. Push it into the bloodstream of social media. Let the chorus of supporters turn mockery into validation. This was the cycle she had mastered, the loop that made her indispensable in the theater of political outrage. And yet, the contradictions never stopped surfacing. She positioned herself as a truth-teller, but often contradicted her own past statements. She declared herself a champion of free thought, but demanded rigid loyalty from her audience. She painted herself as the antidote to victimhood, yet constantly framed criticism of her as proof of persecution. These contradictions didn't weaken her base. In fact, they fueled it. Outrage blurred inconsistencies, and her confidence turned contradictions into performance art. But beneath the surface, cracks showed. There were moments when her dismissal of lived experiences came across as cruelty. Times when her eagerness to belittle shifted from debate into spectacle. The audience outside her base noticed. They saw someone who wielded arrogance as strategy, who earned politics into a stage show of sneers and smirks. Still, the formula worked. Each time she walked away from a debate with headlines, each time she trended for shouting over an opponent, the cycle reinforced itself. She had always gotten away with it before. That was the unspoken truth in the minds of so many watching. They had seen this pattern repeat. Candace storms the stage, silences with volume, dominates with aggression, and spins the chaos into clout. It was predictable, familiar, frustratingly effective. And for a long time, her opponents played into her hands. They raised their voices, matched her insults, got tangled in her theater. Each time they did, she won, not the argument, but the attention war. That night, Candace came in believing it would be no different. She leaned into her old tactics with ease. The raised voice, the sharp insults, the dismissive laughter, it was all part of the script she had rehearsed for years. Her supporters cheered, her detractors groaned, and the cycle seemed ready to repeat. But there was something different in the air, something Candace, for all her instincts, failed to register. Jasmine Crockett wasn't stepping into the trap. She wasn't there to wrestle in the mud or trade insults until the crowd couldn't tell who was right and who was wrong. She was patient, composed, deliberate. And patience was the one thing Candace had never prepared for. This time, the formula would fail. This time, the scream would not dominate. Because this time, Candace Owens underestimated her opponent. Jasmine Crockett's story does not begin under the spotlight. It begins in the quiet corners of ordinary struggle, the kind of struggle that doesn't trend, doesn't make headlines, but builds character. One hardship at a time. Born into a working-class family, she grew up surrounded by the weight of expectation and the reality of limitation. The bills didn't pay themselves. Opportunities weren't handed over freely. Every step forward was earned, not given. From an early age, Jasmine learned the power of listening. Where others shouldn't, needed to be heard, she absorbed voices that were often silenced. The neighbor fighting eviction, the single mother juggling 3 jobs, the young man locked out of opportunity before he ever got a chance to prove himself. Their stories imprinted on her, not as distant tales, but as familiar echoes. She understood because she lived close enough to feel their weight. That empathy became her foundation. Education was her escape and her weapon. She clawed her way through classrooms, textbooks worn at the edges, long nights spent proving that her presence in those rooms was not by accident, but by merit. While others dismissed young women like her as unfit to lead, Jasmine sharpened her tools, determined to not just occupy space, but to change it. Every diploma, every exam, every internship was another brick in the foundation she was building, not for herself alone, but for the people she carried with her in spirit. The road was not smooth. There were closed doors, raised eyebrows, and condescending voices questioning her legitimacy. She was told to smile more, to quiet down, to wait her turn. But Jasmine never mistook patience for permission. She understood that resilience was not about avoiding obstacles, but pushing through them until they broke. Each no she heard only sharpened her resolve. Each setback reminded her who she was fighting for. When she entered public service, she didn't arrive like a thunderclap. She came in like steady rain, persistent, consistent, nourishing the soil that had been left dry for too long. She took cases nobody else wanted. She represented voices nobody else cared to hear. She stood beside people who walked into courtrooms already written off by society, and she fought for them as if the verdicts were personal. For Jasmine, they were. Her reputation grew, not from spectacle, but from credibility. Judges respected her preparation, clients usted her compassion. Colleagues noted her endurance. She wasn't chasing a stage, she was building a record. And piece by piece, that record told the story of someone who didn't just know the struggle from a distance, but carried it in her bones. Politics, for Jasmine, wasn't a career pivot. It was a calling. She didn't run for office to amplify herself, but to amplify those who rarely got the mic. Her speeches weren't crafted for applause lines, but for clarity. She didn't grandstand. She grounded. She didn't roar. She reasoned. And yet people listened, not because she demanded attention, but because she had earned respect. Here is where the cinematic contrast sharpens. While Candace Owens sprinted toward the spotlight, crafting viral moments and cultivating spectacle, Jasmine Crockett built credibility brick by brick, year by year. Candace sought headlines. Jasmine sought justice. Candace measured her impact in clicks. Jasmine measured hers in lives touched, cases won, policies advanced. The difference was stark, the kind of contrast that only becomes undeniable when the two paths finally collide. And collide they would. By the time Jasmine stepped onto that stage, opposite Candace, she wasn't just another politician hoping to survive a debate. She was a woman whose entire life had been preparation for moments like this. Every closed door, every condescending dismissal, every courtroom battle, every policy fight, it all converged here. She was armed not with volume, but with resilience, not with spectacle, but with truth, not with arrogance, but with authenticity. The crowd may not have known all the details of her journey, but they could feel it. They could sense the steadiness in her voice, the groundedness in her presence, the way she refused to flinch, even when her opponent screamed inches away. She was unshaken because this was not the hardest room she had ever stood in, nor the loudest voice she had ever faced. Candace screamed for attention. Jasmine stood for something larger. One was a storm of noise, the other a force of nature built from endurance. That credibility, forged in years of service and sacrifice, was about to collide with chaos. The tension that had already been simmering finally snapped into open confrontation. Candace, emboldened by her own fury, leaned into the microphone with the precision of a performer who had rehearsed outrage until it became instinct. She didn't wait for Jasmine to finish a sentence. She didn't even allow pauses. Every breath was seized as an opportunity to interject, to mock, to derail. "Answer the question!" she barked, her tone dripping with contempt. "Stop dodging. Stop pretending. People like you always hide behind excuses." Her words weren't designed for dialogue. They were darts meant to puncture dignity. Every time Jasmine opened her mouth, Candace's voice crashed over her like a wave, louder, sharper, brimming with scorn. Laughter erupted from a pocket of Candace's supporters in the audience, not because the interruptions were witty, but because they were cruel. Cruelty, after all, had always been part of her performance. Jasmine did not flinch. Her hands rested calmly on the lectern, her posture upright, her expression steady. She let Candace's interruptions ring out, let the echo of her raised voice fill the room, and then, without raising her own, she continued as if the storm beside her did not exist. The contrast was jarring. Candace's fury scorched the air, but Jasmine's calmness absorbed the heat and reflected it back like a mirror. Each interruption only underscored the imbalance, one woman scrambling for dominance, the other rooted in composure. Candace doubled down. She smirked, rolled her eyes theatrically, gestured with wide, sweeping arms that bordered on caricature. "This is why no one takes you seriously," she sneered. "You're weak. You're predictable. You're out of your depth, and everyone here knows it." A ripple moved through the audience. Not cheers, not applause, but murmurs, the kind of sound that carried discomfort. People shifted in their seats. Some folded their arms, others whispered to neighbors. The laughter that had once punctuated Candace's interruptions grew thinner, hesitant. The spectacle was beginning to wear on the room. Still, Jasmine remained unmoved. When she did speak, her voice was even, controlled, a direct contrast to the storm beside her. She didn't match volume with volume. She didn't bite at the bait of insult. Instead, her words carried a weight that only calmness can lend, like a stone dropped into turbulent water, rippling outward in quiet defiance. The rhythm of the debate became a test of endurance. Candace hurled barbs like wildfire, trying to consume every inch of space. Jasmine responded with stillness, a refusal to be swept up, a refusal to legitimize the theatrics with equal rage. With each passing minute, the stakes grew higher. The audience's tension was no longer about policy or points. It was about composure. Who would break first? Who would crack under the pressure of the moment? Candace's face grew tighter, her interruptions sharper. She could sense the shift, the slow erosion of control. The louder she screamed, the calmer Jasmine seemed. It was a dynamic Candace had never faced before, her fury not dominating, but being exposed for what it was, desperation in disguise. The room seemed to hold its breath. The cameras zoomed in. Phones tilted upward, capturing not just words, but the collision of two very different kinds of power. One fed on spectacle, the other drew strength from silence. And then, just as Candace's voice cracked with the strain of her own shouting, Jasmine leaned slightly forward, her eyes steady, her presence radiating poise. She inhaled, slow and deliberate, preparing to finally answer, not with rage, not with mockery, but with something far more devastating. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for Jasmine's reply. The storm had raged long enough. Candace's voice still echoed faintly in the microphone as she smirked, expecting another stuttered attempt from Jasmine to wedge a word in between her tirades. But Jasmine did not rush. She did not grab for the mic or bark a response. Instead, she stood there, shoulders squared, eyes fixed with quiet precision on her opponent, and waited. The silence stretched for just long enough to become uncomfortable. The audience, restless from the chaos of interruption after interruption, shifted forward in their seats. Some held their breath. Some clutched their phones tighter, instinctively sensing that this was the moment worth capturing. When Jasmine finally spoke, her voice was measured, soft enough that people had to lean in, but firm enough that every syllable landed like a gavel. "You've spoken a lot tonight, Candace," she began, her tone steady, almost conversational. "But yelling isn't proof. Mockery isn't evidence. And theatrics—" She allowed the briefest pause, letting her eyes sweep across the audience, "are not the same as truth." The words fell with surgical precision. The audience murmured, a ripple moving through the room. Candace's smile faltered just slightly, her eyes narrowing, as if she hadn't expected Jasmine to remain so composed after the barrage. Jasmine continued. "You claim I dodge questions," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Yet every time I begin to answer, you interrupt. That's not debate. That's not dialogue. That's desperation masquerading as strength." Gasps broke out across the room. A few claps rang from the back, tentative but clear. Jasmine didn't rush to capitalize on them. She simply paused, letting the reaction swell and then fade before continuing. Her rhythm was deliberate. She would land a point, wait for the weight of it to sink in, and then strike again. "You say people like me hide behind excuses?" Jasmine said, her voice growing firmer now. "But let's be honest. What you call excuse are actually realities you choose not to acknowledge. You can shout over me all you want, but shouting doesn't erase the truth." Candace's lips tightened, her posture stiffening. The smug smirk was giving way to something taut, something defensive. Her eyes darted briefly toward the crowd, as though searching for reinforcement, but the laughter that had once accompanied her interruptions was gone. In its place, there was silence, an anticipatory hush that belonged entirely to Jasmine, and Jasmine wielded that silence like a weapon. She leaned slightly forward, voice still calm, but sharper now, like a scalpel cutting through layers of pretense. "You want to paint me as weak? Let's examine that. Strength isn't measured in decibels, it's measured in discipline. And when you lose control of your own voice, when you let anger dictate your words, you're not showing strength, you're showing surrender." The audience erupted in a chorus of gasps and murmurs. someone audibly whispered, "Wow." A ripple of applause broke through, louder now, less restrained. Candace's jaw tightened. She raised her microphone as if to respond, but Jasmine lifted a hand gently, not in command, but in assertion of her turn to speak. The gesture was small, but it carried power, and Candace, for once, lowered the mic. Jasmine pressed forward. "You call me predictable," she said, pausing just long enough for the word to hang in the air. "But what could be more predictable than anger? What could be more obvious than shouting? Anybody can raise their voice, anybody can throw insults, but not everybody can stand here, calm, unshaken, and let the truth speak louder than the noise." The murmurs swelled into applause, scattered at first, then gathering strength like a tide. Candace's face flushed, not with pride, but with frustration. She tried to smirk again, tried to lean on her trademark bravado, but the cracks were visible. Her eyes no longer sparkled with dominance. They darted, unsettled, searching. Jasmine paused once more, letting the audience settle before moving into her final dismantling. "You say I'm out of my depth," she said, her tone sharpening. "But maybe the real problem is that you've mistaken depth for volume. Depth is not how loudly you can scream. It's how much substance lies behind your words. And tonight, the louder you've yelled, the clearer it's become that your arguments are hollow." The line landed with precision, and the crowd reacted instantly. Cheers, claps, and even laughter, not cruel, but incredulous, as if they'd just witnessed a magician's final reveal. Candace's expression hardened, the smugness gone entirely now, replaced with the strain of someone losing control of the narrative. And Jasmine was not finished. She stepped back slightly from the microphone, as if considering whether to stop there, then leaned in again, delivering the crescendo with the unhurried confidence of someone who knew the room belonged to her. "I don't need to shout to be heard," she said, her voice calm but ringing with authority. "And I don't need to insult, to make a point, because at the end of the day, people don't remember who yelled the loudest. They remember who spoke with clarity. They remember who stayed composed. They remember who stood in the fire and didn't burn." The audience erupted, not with the scattered reactions of before, but with a roar of applause, a wave of energy that surged through the auditorium. People stood to their feet. Some whistled, some cheered, but all of it was directed at Jasmine's calm authority. Candace's face told the story best. The smugness had drained away. Her forced smile looked brittle, stretched thin across tension she could no longer conceal. Her eyes flickered with frustration, her knuckles white as she gripped the mic. And then came Jasmine's final hammer blow, the line that would be clipped, shared, replayed, and remembered long after the debate ended. She let the applause quiet just enough before delivering it. Her eyes locked on Candace, her voice firm, deliberate, final. "You thought you could break me by shouting, but all you've done is show the world that calm dismantles chaos every time." The line detonated in the room. The audience exploded into cheers, many leaping to their feet. Phones shot higher, capturing the moment. Some chanted her name, others simply clapped until their hands stung. Candace said nothing. For once, her weaponized tongue was silent. And in that silence, the truth rang louder than any scream. The silence that followed said more than any scream ever could. The clip traveled faster than wildfire. Within minutes, snippets of Jasmine's calm counterattack were everywhere. One angle from the front row captured the split-second transition. Candace's lips tightening, Jasmine's steady eyes locked forward, the silence of a room stunned into reverence. Another clip, filmed shakily from the balcony, caught the gasp of the crowd at the very moment Jasmine's final line landed. Together, they painted a scene no spin could erase. On Twitter, the hashtags ignited like sparks on dry grass. #CalmOverChaos, trended within half an hour. Soon after, Ash Jasmine Wins climbed the global charts. TikTok swarmed with edits, slow-motion replays, reaction videos, even musical remixes that turned Jasmine's words into a kind of anthem. Teenagers who had never watched a political debate before were suddenly lip-syncing her reply. Instagram stories filled with captions like, "This is leadership," and "She didn't raise her voice once and she still won." Cable news scrambled to keep up. Conservative networks tried to frame the clash as a minor spat, but even they couldn't ignore the raw footage that had already gone viral. Progressive commentators, meanwhile, hailed the moment as a turning point. "What we saw on that stage," one anchor declared, "was the triumph of dignity over volume. Jasmine Crockett reminded the nation that you don't have to scream to be heard." And then came the celebrities. A-list actors tweeted lines of admiration. Musicians quoted Jasmine's words between song lyrics. Influencers with millions of followers stitched their own reactions into the debate clips, some even tearing up as they described how validating it felt to see someone stand tall without theatrics, without compromise. It wasn't just politics anymore, it was culture. But perhaps the most powerful reactions came from ordinary people. Immigrant parents commented beneath the videos, saying, "This is how we tell our kids to act when others try to belittle them." Young black women shared posts about Jasmine's composure, calling it a mirror of their own struggles. Constant battles against being shouted over, dismissed, or mocked, yet rising above, with clarity and fire contained in calm. One viral comment summed it up. "Candace gave us chaos. Jasmine gave us grace. And grace won." As people left that night, they carried more than the memory of a viral moment. They carried a lesson stitched into the rhythm of their hearts. Composure is contagious. Dignity inspires dignity. Patience invites reflection. What Jasmine gave them was not just a performance, but a model for how to live when chaos tries to claim the stage of life. And yet, beneath the applause and the pride, another feeling stirred: anticipation. Because if one woman's calm reply could silence a scream and ignite hope, what might happen if an entire generation chose dignity over outrage? What might happen if patience became the strategy, if truth became the weapon, if composure became the shield? Jasmine had not just won an exchange. She had lit a spark. The silence that followed her words was not an ending. It was a beginning. A promise that calm will always outlast chaos, that dignity will always eclipse hate, that patience will always outshine arrogance. And as the crowd remembered that night, they knew this was more than politics. It was proof. Proof that when chaos screams, calm can and will answer. Because in the end, the lesson was timeless. The scream fades, but dignity echoes forever. Candace's scream may have pierced the room, but Jasmine's calm reply carved its place in history. One was noise, fleeting and chaotic. The other was truth, steady and unforgettable. In that moment, the world saw that dignity does not tremble before arrogance, it transforms it. What began as a clash of voices became a lesson for all of us. Calm is not weakness, it is the highest form of strength. Composure is not silence, it is clarity sharpened into power. Jasmine reminded us that the loudest voice is not always the most commanding, the grounded one is. So here's the takeaway. When chaos rises, when someone tries to drown you in volume and venom, you don't have to match their fire. You can stand or breathe and let your dignity do the work. Because real leadership isn't proven in a scream. It's revealed in the silence that follows. If this story moved you, share it. Comment with your thoughts on how calmness defeats chaos. Subscribe for more stories where truth and composure rise above noise. Because in the end, chaos is temporary, dignity is forever, and history always remembers who stayed steady.